I see you're about to listen to an episode I recorded when I first started my FIRE journey. I definitely didn't want to delete this episode because I still feel there's some value there, but just understand that some of the stuff I mention definitely isn't applicable today. So I would say take everything in this episode with a little bit of a grain of salt, and do check out an episode I released in November 2022 called My Top 10 FIRE Regrets. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Irish FIRE podcast. I'm your host, Michael Houghton. I'm an entrepreneur, investor, and financial independence enthusiast, sharing my financial freedom journey. Stay tuned and welcome aboard. And this has been something which has been on my mind recently, and Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is often cited as most people's first glimpse into the financial independence world. And I was listening to some of his stuff on YouTube the other day, and I'll actually share it in the show notes so that you can follow along and maybe see what I was seeing in what he was talking about. And some of the things that Robert Kiyosaki says are things like saving is for losers, the share market is nothing but a Ponzi scheme, debt is good if used correctly. And there's a lot of things that he says where, when I really think about it, fundamentally go against what a lot of the FIRE community is preaching. The best example, obviously, is the share market, where in the financial independence community, index funds is probably the best way to achieve financial independence. Now, I say probably only because in Ireland we're so taxed through them that it's not always the best path. But Robert does raise some interesting viewpoints, and they are somewhat controversial. And so I kind of took a moment to reflect on this and think more about what Robert was actually trying to get across. And I eventually came to the conclusion that Robert is basically an active investor. And when it comes to the financial independence world, we're constantly pushing for passive investments. All right, so the passive investments are our index funds, anything where we don't actually have to actively do anything. The money will come in regardless once we set it up. Whereas if you look at Robert and what he's done, he's effectively become financially independent through things like big businesses, real estate where he's managing the properties, business deals, borrowing money through banks and buying assets, trading in some cases, he's mentioned that in the past as well. And whether it was him trading or another trader, he was still ultimately reaching out to somebody. In fact, there's one particular video that I watched on Robert where somebody actually put their hand up and said, "Robert, why don't you have a job?" And Robert answers by saying, "Well, I'm too busy doing real estate deals. I don't have time for a job." And so, yeah, we've talked in the past about financial independence being a time independence concept, yet here is Robert Kiyosaki basically filling his day by doing active investing. And so for me, perhaps Robert Kiyosaki isn't the best role model when it comes to financial independence. So who is? Well, you've probably got the likes of Mr. Money Mustache, the Mad Scientist, a few of those guys who have actually made it. But the truth be told, when it comes to passive investing, it is really boring, right? There isn't much to say. Save X amount per month, throw it in an index fund, keep doing it at the same day, at the same time every single month, and eventually you would have built up enough capital to be able to retire early. Boom. There we go, folks. The whole financial independence how-to in 15 seconds. But the truth is, we know that it isn't that simple, or at least as humans, I think we're always trying to find shortcuts. And this has largely been where my mind has been recently. As many of you know, I have other businesses that I've been running, side projects if you like. And some of those side projects, I'm pleased to report, have the potential in the next 12 to 18 months to make me become financially independent, with a catch. The catch being that they won't be truly passive investments. They will be active investments. So one such example is my Forex trading company. And I've mentioned this on the show previously. And the last 3 months, I've had really, really good results. In October, for example, I returned over 7% monthly return. So that's a 7% annual return in 1 month, which is pretty good going. And so I've made the decision, and I guess I'm touching back to a few episodes ago where I mentioned that I have a long-term investment portfolio and a short-term investment portfolio. I've made the decision to start taking a few more risks with my short-term portfolio and basically putting that money into active investments. And so I have two main active investments that I'm primarily looking at over the next 12 months where I'd like to put that money. The first, as I mentioned, is in the Forex trading company, and my plan for 2020 is to try and build that money up into 40,000 euros. I figure if I could be returning 5% a month of 40,000 euros, then that's 2,000 euros a month, which is basically me halfway to financial independence. And yes, I'm hearing you. You're arguing that, hang on a second, Michael, these are active investments. So kind of it's like cheating. And I do agree with you. I hear what you're saying. But at the same time, I'm going back to Mr. Robert Kiyosaki. And this is why this episode is titled Robert Kiyosaki versus Financial Independence. Because for me, it's kind of one or the other. And I've mentioned on the show before that I do see myself as an entrepreneur. I feel like I need to start exploring the entrepreneur side a little bit more, because being an entrepreneur is one way to become financially independent in the long run. So yes, doing active trading isn't truly being financially independent in the traditional sense, but it's still getting me away from selling my time for money, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do. And when it comes to my actual financial trading, it takes me less than 15 minutes per day to get set up and do. And whether I have 1,000 euros in the pot or 40,000 euros in the pot, that time actually doesn't change. The only thing that really does change is my stress levels around potentially losing that money. But as I said, I've been trading now for almost 12 months and my confidence is growing each and every month. And what about some other side projects that are starting to do well? Well, I've mentioned my hockey coaching company a few times. And I did mention a couple of months back, I've been working on a new angle for the hockey coaching company. And that isn't something that I can reveal yet, but I promise you, when that does happen, I will do a whole episode on it, because actually it's going to be quite an inspirational story about what I've been doing. As I said, I don't want to mention it just yet because it's still very much in development, but when I do, I will certainly let you guys know, and I think you'll be quite impressed with how that's managed to come about, and that potentially has the making of allowing me to get to financial independence a lot quicker, or at least start living my life how I would in retirement anyway, which I think has been a big drive of what I've been trying to do for the last 6 months. So what's a takeaway here? Well, I think a lot of this comes back to the fact that I did set myself up to give myself more time freedom. And I've been working part-time now for 13 months. And when I look back, it's been a fairly interesting journey. I mean, moving part-time itself, for anybody, regardless of your financial situation or if you're trying to become financially independent, is an interesting journey in its own right. And I think a lot of the stuff around the active investments have come about because I've had this time to actually think, where I'm not under pressure to go and sell my time for money. And it's amazing how the outlook is so different when you can actually have that mindset. And so I can appreciate that this may not be for everybody. And what I'm proposing that I'm going to do might sound a little bit against financial independence in the true sense of it being passive. But at the same time, there's a little bit of Robert Kiyosaki in me. And I want to be inspired a little bit by the fact that I could use my own money to develop something myself and use it as an active investment and be okay with that. And I think something that I saw from the guys at the Fire Madrid meetup that I went to was that a lot of them had become financially independent through real estate. And what I realized was, and one of the questions I asked them was, do you have a property manager? And they said, oh no, I manage the property myself. So the realization I had through this was that this is an active investment. Being a landlord is not a passive investment. It is definitely an active investment. And whether it takes 1 hour, 5 hours, 10 hours per month, it still means that you actually have to answer the phone or answer an email. You can't just sit back on a beach somewhere and watch the money come in. And furthermore, even with passive investments, you still need to monitor it. It's not a case where we can just turn a complete blind eye and go out and do our own thing anyway. And truthfully, if you've been watching your portfolio over a long period of time, you're likely going to be checking it on at least a monthly basis just to make sure that everything's still heading in the right direction. So I think sometimes we get so caught up on the passive side that we forget the bigger picture. And I think ultimately that's what I'm trying to do here by exploring some of the active investments that I could potentially find myself growing my portfolio through. As always, if you have any questions on this episode, reach out to me at michael@firepodcast.ie, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Here are a few ways you can support the show. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. If you're using Apple Podcasts, why not leave a review? Become a member at firepodcast.ie and get access to free resources to help on your FI journey. Thanks again for your continued support.